You found the Backup Wrap-Up, your go-to podcast for all things backup, recovery, and cyber recovery. In this episode, we explore the critical process of doing a business impact analysis. A BIA, I know, is one of those things you know you need to do, but you probably haven't. We tried to make learning about this as educational and entertaining as we can. We'll uncover why BIAs are essential for all organizations, how they can save you time, money, and headaches in the long run, how one informs your disaster recovery plans, and even can help justify critical investments in backup and DR. By the way, if you don't know who I am, I'm W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I've been passionate about these topics for over 30 years, ever since I had to tell my boss that we had no backups of a really important database that we had just lost. I don't want that to happen to you, and that's why I do this. On this podcast, we turn unappreciated backup admins into cyber recovery heroes. This is the Backup Wrap-Up. Welcome to the show. Hi, I'm your host, W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup. And before I continue, just want to ask you to press subscribe or follow wherever it is that you're listening or watching. You know, you can watch this on YouTube, on our channel. You can listen to this on your favorite podcast channel. Just, press follow or subscribe so that you can always get our content. And I want to, of course, introduce my co-host, a guy who owes me, I'm going to say, about 2 hours of my life back. Prasanna Malayan. How's it going, Prasanna? And you know why, don't you?
I do know why, and I completely disagree with the statement. And I think that you have listeners out there who would also disagree with that statement.
It is funny because, the statement that I'm about to make is definitely going to dishearten at least one listener who contacted us via our the message thing that we have on backupwrapup.com, and he was very excited that I was about to watch was it Kalki 2898
AD.
AD. Dude, I just could not. I don't know if it's do I not know enough about Indian culture and all of because there was a lot in there.
Yeah. So two things I would say. One, yes, there is a lot of Indian mythology and culture with the Mahabharata that you have to be able to understand a little bit about in order to truly understand it. The second thing I would say is the first half is a little difficult to watch. The second half is great.
Well, if you can understand it, this is the problem. I was so bored with the first half that I kept fast forwarding, and I guess I just completely missed the story.
Yeah. And that's your problem, though. You fast forwarded the parts that you should have been watching.
It was an hour and a half of poking my eyes out, that first half.
But you're also the one who tends to fall asleep in movies, regardless.
I wasn't falling asleep. I was just wanting to go. I don't know. I was just bored.
I think the other thing I should mention, Curtis and I, we have a very good friend, Indian friend, and when he and I were chatting about this, he also had the same, not full experience as Curtis, but he said the first half was awful, but he loved the second half, and he actually said he would rewatch the movie.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I'm going to have to, take an edible or something to maybe get, I need a summary of, who these people are, what the mythology is, because there's so much mythology in there, right? I think going in blind, it was just a mess. All right. Well, we have our resident cybersecurity expert, Doctor. I got to call you. I realize I should be calling you Dr. Mike Saylor. How's it going, Mike?
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Well, other than wanting 2 hours back of my week. This week, we're going to talk about something that is super important. You know what? It might be like the first half of that other movie. It's really important to do, but nobody wants to do it, right? Nobody wants to do this thing. But if you don't do it, You know what I mean? It's the thing. One of the things that we talk a lot about on that I say a lot when we start talking about backup and
3, 2, 1
recovery.
rule.
What's that? No, not that. I say when we start talking about backup and recovery, anytime somebody starts asking, what should my retention be? What should my RTO be? What should my RPO be? And I'm like, that is not something you should be deciding. That is something that the business should be deciding. And the
You
business,
as a backup admin.
Yeah, you as a backup admin, correct. Thank you for clarifying, right? It is not the backup admin's job to come up with retention or recovery requirements or anything like that. Obviously, it's not a backup admin's job to decide on how much to spend on those various things, right? And there may be parts of the organization where you spend more money versus less money. You may have a completely different data protection system for your critical systems versus your non-critical systems, right? You could have like 3 different things. And how are you going to know that and know what parts to do if someone hasn't done a business impact analysis? So this is one of those things where it's like, oh, got to do that thing. But can you imagine designing any sort of system, a cybersecurity system, a backup system, a network system? Like how do you decide what to buy and what to use if you don't know how the business is going to use those things? What do you think, Mike?
Well, it can be done. It just won't be done effectively. And so, I often use the example, if I've got $100 for my security budget to protect 100 things, if I actually have an inventory of my stuff, well, let's say I have 100 things and you give me $100 to protect it, not knowing the value or the attributes or the requirements or anything else about these 100 things, I'm going to evenly spread my $100 across 100 things.
Really?
Not giving preference or priority to what would turn out to be.
See, Mike, see, you did the proper thing. I would basically be like, okay, here's $2 for the things. Let me just pocket the other 98.
Well, I think honestly, I've spent a lot of time in a lot of companies where that's exactly the way the backup system is designed, right? All systems have the same backup setup. They have the same retention period, the same recovery ability, right? They're not using, there may be, sometimes there'll be a handful of systems that will be deemed critical, and they might get a separate system. They might get a disaster recovery system that has no connection to the backup system, which is not something that I like, right? A lot of people are like, well, DR is, that's a completely different thing. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's the exact same function. It's just for a slightly different purpose, right? And so it's same thing, right? And I'm sure you've seen that too, Persona, right? Like, I mean, yeah.
Yep. It's like, oh yeah, there's just, do you want, and it's usually, right, your gold, silver, bronze plans, right? And it's like, yep, just map it into one of those 3. That's all you get, rather than, is it really one of these 3 that it should go into?
Yeah. Well, I don't mind gold, silver, bronze. I've been in tons of environments where it's just bronze. Like everybody gets bronze, everybody gets gold. And they literally get exactly the same thing. And I guess that's fine if you can afford gold for everybody, right? If you can have a really tight RTO and RPO for everybody and you can get away with that, I suppose that's okay for a backup system.
Yeah. Or bronze is good enough, except for when it fails, when that high-end system needs something different. And then the business complains.
Yeah, and then the business complains. So, all right. So, and by the way, when we say business, we are, we're going to use the term business. We don't mean to exclude non-businesses like government organizations, which are not really businesses, I guess. I don't know what you'd call them, but is there a term other than governmental org? Mike, what do you think?
We just call them organizations.
Yeah, that's the term. Yeah, that is a term, organization, because it encompasses both businesses. And businesses, by the way, you have both for-profit businesses and non-profit businesses, and they do function differently, and they would do their BIA business impact analysis. They would do their BIA differently. Prasanna, it looks like you're
I
wanting
have
to
a
say
question.
something. Yeah.
Yeah. Is the business, the organization, would you say that they are stakeholders in these requirements that end up getting fed into, say, the backup admin?
Well, when you say the business and they business is not they, right?
Yeah.
A stakeholder is a person. We're going to get to that,
Yeah.
right? A stakeholder is a person. Well, a stakeholder could be a department or a person who's running that department, right? But the finance department is a stakeholder in the cybersecurity system, right? But the organization per se, the company, is not. Well, yeah, I don't
It's
know.
formed up. It's all just like
Yeah, I guess it's
stakeholders all
like
put
one
together,
giant
right?
stakeholder. But
Yeah.
generally, when we talk about stakeholders, we're talking about individual people or
Individual.
parts of the organization.
Yeah. This is
Mike,
like holistically across the
any different
entire
than that? You have any
organization.
different opinion than that?
No, that's a great place to start. I think oftentimes when you begin the conversation, begin the exercise of a BIA, you often learn what the organization's idea of who the stakeholders are, and sometimes they even consider third parties stakeholders. So if we outsource this or rely on a vendor or a person for that.
Yeah, and I would say the very first thing that we start with a BIA is sort of just determining what business are we in? What is the function of our organization, right? Is it, to sell widgets? Is it to manufacture widgets? Is it to promote the well-being of children, right? We're a nonprofit. Is it to
watch Tamil or watch Bollywood movies?
I don't think that's anybody's. If the organization might be, to issue business licenses for the county of San Diego, right? That might be our organization. That's the very first thing, is to determine just overall what is our function, what is our mission, and then everything is going to plug into that function and mission, right?
Right.
Yeah. And then what would be the next step?
So when you look at what do we do here,
Yeah.
then we break that out into what are all the things, similar to just following your thread. What are all the things that contribute to doing that thing, our mission? There are the traditional activities and departments like accounting and HR and marketing and legal, and those are traditional in the sense that those are components of a normal organization. Some of them are outsourced or contract as needed, and then some of them in larger organization or even a specific organization may have an internal, formal, or mature department. So that's where you start. You start with kind of at the top, the executive level, and you have discussions about mission, vision, services, strategy, and plans. And then from there, in that discussion, you kind of identify the next level down that you need to talk to. What are those? Who are those department heads? What are those critical departments? And then, so you just keep digging in layer to layer until you figure out that the message repeats, or you've really met you're talking to the person that knows the majority, if not all, of whatever that area of responsibility is.
And I can imagine it could be challenging because sometimes even within, like if you are working within an organization, you don't know who all the people are, the stakeholders. So I'm guessing for you to sort of go around and find all these people could sometimes be a little difficult.
It is. And we've actually had people run from us. Hey, we're doing the BIA, and they're gone for 2 days. And so,
by the way, Mike, there was something that you reminded me of that we discussed during the pre-call, and that was the fact that you're coming in to do a BIA, because one of the things you mentioned on the pre-call was to not do this yourself and to, if possible, use a third party. Why do you think that?
Well, I think there's a couple of things there. I think there's a natural bias within the organization, even if it's a friendly one. My department's, competitive and better than yours. But when you start really talking to people about their job. And if they're truly passionate about their job and supporting the company, then they're going to feel a little ownership over that. And then when we get to the discussion about priorities and importance, significance, materiality, of course, everybody thinks their job is the most important. Um, and it should be recovered faster, and I should be able to get back to my job because I really hate using pencil and paper or making phone calls instead of using email. So internally, if I was an employee at an organization to go do this BIA, one, you're given quite a bit of authority. So there'd be a charter associated with this that gives me access to everyone and requires them to collaborate with me and answer honestly and all these things. And so now I'm kind of like teacher's pet, which could affect me down the road. So after this is over, I could be, shunned or develop some level of
Oh, that's a really
animosity
good point.
among my coworkers having done this, especially if it doesn't come out the way someone wanted it to. Like, oh, what do you mean I'm not the first priority anymore? I thought we were friends. And so that's one thing, or a couple of things. So one, organizations, even well-oiled, mature, friendly organizations, you will identify some level of territorial ownership during these exercises, and if you're part of that organization, it's a little more difficult to get through that. And then I think secondly, or maybe alternatively, you could experience some backlash or flack after the fact, having been given the authority to go and do this exercise. So we recommend, and the vast majority of BIAs that have completed successfully and effectively are done by a third party, someone that's objective. Hey, I don't know anything about your organization. I need you to teach me, which I think is another inherent flaw of doing it yourself, is you have this tribal knowledge and you just think, oh, it's always been done this. I don't need to ask that question. I know the answer to this question.
Right.
And so that could be just a flaw out the gate if you're doing it yourself versus having a third party come in and fresh set of eyes and ears and perspectives. But also someone that's experienced and having done these before, what questions to ask, what details am I looking for, some framework and logic to how we prioritize things and define things versus, Mike, just employee Mike coming up with his own assessment of what the priorities and things should be.
Because the questions you ask, you want to make sure you're getting the information. So by the time you get all the way downstream to sort of prioritizing and everything else, you already have a lot of the answers to help you with that work. Versus if you don't know, like you said, Mike, if you've never done this before and you just have some questions, you might have to either go back, ask people the questions, you might miss something, and it'll just impact your later analysis. Is that correct?
It is. And just to dig in there. So for example, if I'm asking you, what's the impact if you can't do your job by hour, by day, by week? And the response to that is something I just take at face value without going back to maybe another department like accounting or HR or operations and getting their input on the inability to conduct some critical business process as a validation. But then also that gives you insight as the consultant doing the work into the interdependencies of different departments, which a department might not see, especially in a larger organization.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like that. So this idea, it's yet another area where an outside person can do this both more effectively, probably faster. You end up with a better quality product when you're done, and also, as you mentioned, it's safer for you as a person to have somebody do this. So let's go back to we were talking about, we identify the stakeholders. And again, this term means a lot of things. What we're mainly talking about, there are these organizational, generally departments or business functions, or whatever organizational functions. There are organizational functions that would be impacted by, in this case, a cyber event. Or, if you're doing a BIA, you should be looking at all the different types of events that could potentially impact your business, right? If you're doing this, you should be doing all those things. What I like to say, when we get to those stakeholders, I want to, in each of these functional areas, I want to identify both a decision maker and an influencer. Now, let me just give a great example. There was, I used to, well, a really long time ago, I did some work with an aerospace company and, a satellite company, actually. And they had a very rigid change control process when you wanted to do something. And this would kind of fall under that. And when you were going to make a change, you had to invite all of the stakeholders were very much identified, and you had to invite all the stakeholders. And one of the things I learned was that there was this one guy. I'll just say his first name, Jack. There was this one guy. His name was Jack, and everybody knew that Jack was the hard one to please, and he was an influencer. He wasn't a decision maker. He was an influencer. He wasn't in charge of the department, but he was the person in that person's ear, right? And what everybody told me was, if you can just make Jack happy with what you're thinking about doing, then everybody else will be fine, because Jack is the sort of the curmudgeon. And so that's what I'm saying. In each stakeholder area, there's going to be both a decision maker, and possibly it could be that the decision maker and the influencer are the same person. But if it's a large organization, there could be a decision maker and one or more influencers. And I'm saying, decide or figure out who those people are. Any thoughts on that?
Agreed.
Okay. All right. All right.
So
go ahead.
You have this. So you've identified the stakeholders. What are you asking them? Like,
yeah. Next
what are
question.
these questions? Yeah.
So what would you say you do here? Right. So there's a couple.
So when you said that, Mike, you know what I was thinking? I was thinking about Office Space with the two mice.
Yeah, that's exactly what he was saying. So what would you say you do here? Yeah.
So there's a couple of high-level objectives that you want to cover with your stakeholders. One, tell me about your role. So you're the manager, you're the lead, you're the director, whatever it is. What's your role? What are you responsible for? That's going to then help me understand how to direct the questions and what to ask next. So if you're responsible for accounting, okay, well, tell me about your accounting department. Well, we've got one manager, 2 data entry clerks, and accounts payable, this whole kind of org chart. And I may even ask for copies of this stuff, like documentation, because that's going to help me. Who knows how long this BIA is going to last? It could be 1 week. It could be 6 months. So having a repository for me to go back to in work papers is what we would call those, is helpful. So I'm gonna ask for stuff, and I'm also being mindful of their time. If we have to walk through an org chart versus do you have an org chart, I'll walk through that on my own and ask you questions if I have any. So just normal auditor approach to time management. But so tell me what you do here. Tell me what you're responsible for. Tell me what is critical in your area of responsibility for supporting the business mission. So accounting, it's okay that we don't. Maybe it's okay that we don't invoice, but it's probably critical that we pay our bills, all right, lights and tariffs and that. So that would be and that might be different in another organization. It's more important that we send invoices out because that's our revenue, and it's we're a service company versus we really don't have much overhead, so accounts payable is not that important here. So getting some of that criticality and how it supports the company mission. All right, well then who are the subject matter experts in all of these critical functions? I need to talk to them. All right, so Bob or Barbara, whoever's over this critical function, what do you need to do your job? Well, I have to have access to our accounting system. I have to have my computer has to work. I need internet because it's cloud-based. I need multi-factor, so my phone has to work. I need whatever it is to do this job. So you iron that out, and then you go back to management and go, all right, Barbara and Bob said they need these things to do their job. What happens if they can't do their job? What's the impact to the company? Oh, well, these bad things would happen over time.
Yeah.
This is how much, this is the value of that inability to do that process and you want to try and get it down to the hour.
Yeah.
This is how it hurts per hour, and then per day. Per day, you can extrapolate per week, per month. But really, what you're getting, that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, how long until it's materially painful? Is that 2 hours? Is it 2 days? Is it 2 weeks? Because it's not just about money. It could be the implications of other things. Like that telecom company I was telling you guys about earlier. $5 billion telecom company would have been out of business in 2.5 weeks because they couldn't pay the tariffs and taxes on the telecom network in the areas that they serve.
Mm.
So they wouldn't be able to operate if they can't pay their tariffs and taxes. So, I mean, they had plenty of cash in the bank. We could pay our people. We could keep the lights on, but the people that they leased the network from would say, sorry. And so there goes your revenue generation. There goes your, that you breached your contract, any number of other implications that would have put them out of business in 2.5 weeks for that one.
Yeah, and this is going to be different for every organization, right? You talk about finance. I'm flashing back to my very first job in corporate America, which was at a credit card company. It was a very big credit card company, and the amount of time I spent with the finance department, I could very quickly answer to you what's the most critical part of the finance department in at least the credit card company that I work. I'm going to assume the others are similar. Mm-hmm. Or anybody that has like loans and things like that. And the answer would be the ability to process payments, right? Because the reason was that they played the float, right? There was a period of time in between the moment they got the money and the moment that they credited that money to your account, and they made money in between that time. And so the amount of time, because we were constantly, and now, I'm going to date myself here, but we had the technology. We had a mainframe in Dallas, and we had the headquarters were in Delaware. We had the technology to get the payment. The payments were processed in Dallas, but they were credited in Delaware. And so we had the technology to get the data from Texas to Delaware electronically, but to get them from upstairs to downstairs in Delaware, I had to cut a 9-track tape, right? Yeah. And so the process there, a light would come on the tape library, and I'm making a giant, so it was like they were like 5 feet tall, like 4 feet wide. This was one tape drive. A light would come on, and the job of the operator was to watch for that light. That light meant that tape drive had data ready to write, and then they were to load a spool, and they would, and then they were to immediately take that tape to downstairs, which would then, and so that was the thing. Like sending out a credit card statement, no big deal, right? But processing that payment within minutes of us receiving it, that was the number. And so this is going to be different with every company. Do you have anything like that, Prasanna? Like any interesting thing where you've had nothing? Come on.
No. I've always been on the vendor side, Curtis.
Well, vendors are businesses. Like think of yeah. Nothing? Come on, you got something.
Well, speaking from an engineering perspective, right, or product perspective, if you think about it, right, so say you have a SaaS service that is deployed in the cloud, right, for production, right, and say that something happens and the service goes down, like you were talking about, right? It's not like internal accounting anymore. It's, okay, I now have millions of users who may not be able to use my service.
Right.
And at what point do those millions of users start to be like, okay, you're down too long. Now let me go look at alternative services who might be offering some capabilities. And once I've found that, maybe it's like, hey, now I never need to go back to you, even though maybe you fixed the problem.
Yeah, Mike, you talked about that term. What was the term you said? At what point does it become? What did you say? Material. Yeah, mm-hmm. Basically, if your SaaS service is down for 5 minutes or 20 minutes, I don't, depending on the SaaS service, right? I would say if you have a payment processing service, that time is probably really small.
Yeah.
But if you have Prasanna and I used to work for a backup service. If the backup service is down for a few minutes, even for an hour, nobody's going to die, right? But depending on the amount of time that it's down and the number of times that it's down, like you said, Prasanna, they're going to go look for alternatives, and then that's money that you can never get back, right? A customer left you.
Well, sometimes those outages, depending on your SLAs, could result in credits back to your clients.
That too.
So there's a financial impact. So you got reputation, financial, revenue, possibly regulatory, depending on what you're supporting.
And
so
it's like the bank that I know we've talked about this in the past, Mike. The credit union that I have, right? That was down for almost 6 weeks.
Yep. So there's access to. So there's regulatory requirements for financial institution members to have access to their funds within a certain period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Similar to health records, HIPAA requires that you have the ability to have access to your health records within a certain period of time.
How's that going for you, Curtis?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll let you know tomorrow, because tomorrow I have my first doctor's appointment after I think they're going to be fully up now. The medical group that I use was down for months due to a ransomware attack. So basically, Mike, you were talking about asking all these questions. How what's the impact of the business? What we really want to do is we really want to get to some sort of monetary value, right? Because it's that monetary value that we're going to use, that the business is going to use, not those of us making the BIA, but it's that monetary value that the business is going to use to make decisions on, in the case for us, in the matters of cybersecurity, in the matters of backup and recovery and disaster recovery. So you're looking for things like, if we're down for 5 minutes, we lose $1 million, right? This part of the organization. If this part of the organization is down, I've worked with financial trading firms, and they say words like that, right? If we're down for 5 minutes, we lose $1 million every 5 minutes that we're down. And so you use that value. You will use that value in the next phase, which is to design things so that. And I remember that they had workstations where basically, if something happened to a workstation, it was just pull and plug in a new workstation, and they were immediately up and running, right? Yeah. When you have that kind of impact to your business, then you're able to spend that kind of money to do that kind of stuff.
So one question to ask, I know we're talking about the impact to the business, but is there also some seasonality or time period? As an example, Black Friday, the impact of what happens on a Black Friday or Amazon Prime Day is probably significantly higher than, say, any other random day of the year.
Or tax season, or back to school, or you're right. And I think you both have said it a few times, in that it's particular to your organization. So really understanding yourself and the things that happen throughout the year, and being able to prepare for those and be resilient in those events is really important. And to add to something Curtis said, or what you were just the thread, your thread about the value or the output of the BIA, it is to help put an order of magnitude on the value of a particular process and the related outage. But it's also to help identify the interdependencies. So if this one process costs us $1 million for every 5 minutes, we definitely want to make sure that process has some resilience built in. We're able to recover quickly. But as we dig into that process, we start to identify, well, that process involves this person from that other department, or this technology that's supported by this department. And there's a subject matter expert, and there's only one person that knows how to do this. So what happens if he gets hit by a bus? Or decides to quit or ask for more money today because we've got an issue. So it really is, it can be a very complex exercise that adds a ton of value and visibility. Like when you come back to the leadership team after a BIA and you roll out this kind of imaginary blueprint of how all this stuff is interconnected, and the value and the requirements and your perspective on priority, which can shift after this discussion, by the way. It's not it's not written in stone. It is a collaborative exercise, but everybody's eyes are like open. They're like, I had no idea that Barbara's department was that important. I had no idea that, Bob relied on all these other people and all these other departments to do his job. And I had no idea that we would lose $1 million if we were down for 5 minutes. It's huge. And that one exercise feeds into so many other things. It feeds into your disaster recovery plan. It feeds into your IT strategy and your budget. It feeds into your business continuity plan and how you invest in technologies and strategies to recover from events, prioritize all that stuff. People, your staffing plan, your insurance. Your insurance company will be like, I can't believe you're one of the very few people that actually did a business impact analysis and the value that brings. And you'd be amazed at the impact that has on your insurance premium.
Yeah, I like that.
Diligence.
Yep, go ahead.
Just one more point is, if you ever get sued for an outage or an SLA or a contract breach or whatever it is, or your service goes down and it hurts somebody or another business or physically, having done a BIA that then translates into all these things shows a level of diligence in court as far as your defense. Hopefully it was just an anomalous incident, not negligence, but all those internal governance type activities like a BIA just lend itself to the value of you as a company and what you're putting into what you're providing to others.
Yeah, I like that. Obviously, we're identifying the stakeholders, we're identifying the critical aspects of the company and the areas where we're going to lose lots of money. Or again, with government organizations, it's very different. But where we're going to have a significant impact to the organization when these when these functions don't function. And then I really like the idea that these functions rely on these functions, which rely on these functions, which all rely on that one person.
It's like, have you seen that picture where it's like all this software stack and it's like this little open source component at the very bottom? It's like
holding it up.
Yeah,
that's being maintained by some guy in his garage. Yeah. I have absolutely seen that.
And with regard to backups, that BIA is going to drive your data classification, your retention, your backup and recovery prioritization. It should actually save the company money from a backup perspective because you're not backing up everything, and it should make the backup admin's job better because now I can actually schedule on my backup strategy has actually got some logic behind it. I'm backing up high priority stuff more often, lower priority stuff less often, fewer backup tapes, fewer storage allocation, and I can actually recover stuff faster.
And also there are parts of the IT design, the system design, not just the backup system, but you can say, okay, this is a critical part of the organization. So it's going to be put on highly resilient, either cloud resources or highly resilient, compute resources. We're going to use replicated storage with, synchronous or near synchronous replication. For these parts, right? I think of a lot of that. I still think all of it is backup. To me, everything that's used for recovery is backup, but a lot of people don't, right? So it determines all that design. What were you going to say, Prasanna?
So the one question I have, because I know in the past we've talked about your environment is constantly changing, but from a process perspective, like your BIA should kind of be like not static, but it probably doesn't shift unless the business makes a significant shift.
Acquisition, divestiture, change in strategy, new products. Yep.
Yeah. So even though your IT environment, like new applications are coming up or new environments are being stood up, like your BIA doesn't need to be completely redone or shouldn't be redone at all, right? Because that still holds true no matter what the underlying components are.
If
a correct statement?
If it is, if. So in the BIA, we're going to determine how well the business and the technology leadership talk. So is there a steering committee? Is there a business strategy and an IT strategy? Are they aligned? What's the roadmap look like? Because believe it or not, we're we work with a lot of IT organizations that just function as an autonomous group. That I go buy new gear because new gear is cool. Does that really support the business? Have no
Sounds
idea.
sounds
Right?
amazing. Sounds like the greatest IT department ever.
They gave me this budget and I spend it. And so there's that. But yes, and what I mean by you don't need to update the BIA just because your technology environment changed, because if the technology environment is truly aligned with supporting the business, in other words, I'm not just buying frivolously, I'm buying that thing because the business is doing this thing and that translates to how we support it, then no, you don't need to update the BIA for that because the business hasn't changed.
Yeah. But if the business does change, if the business makes a pivot, right? We used to do this thing and now we do this thing, which is a very different thing than that thing, right? If the business moves from, like I worked at Druva and they went from being a software company to being a SaaS company. That is a significant change in how you do business. And it's going to have a significant change in all of those other people. It's going to change the stakeholders. It's going to change the critical parts of the business. And so I could see, Prasanna, you said you're not going to redo the, completely redo the BIA, but I do see
Update.
Like on a similar semi-regular basis, just saying, hey, we did a BIA a year ago. These are the 10 stakeholders we came up with from departments. Are we all the same? Are we all good? Yep. Okay. Here are the 10, vice presidents that we, or the directors or whatever, are they all good? You review, have there been any significant changes in how you do that part of the business? And then finance says to you, yes, we moved our entire organization to, I don't know, QuickBooks or whatever, right? So let's talk about, they're not going to, but you know what I'm saying, right? We're going to move.
And thanks for waiting a year to tell me.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But no, you're right.
Yeah.
At least annually, your disaster recovery, your incident response plan, your disaster recovery, your business continuity, and your BIA should be reviewed once a year at least. And your BIA should actually be included in the binder or repository where your business continuity plan is. So it's either an appendix or a chapter or whatever however you want to organize it. It should be part of that.
You know what? Anytime we can use the word appendix in an episode, I'm excited. Yeah. I don't know what it is about that word. I like it. Any final words on doing a BIA?
It's a great investment. It's relatively a smooth, painless exercise, and it's amazing the value and the awareness it brings to an organization, even one that where the employees have been there working together for so long. It's a fresh perspective with some really good outcomes.
Absolutely. What about you, Prasanna? Any final thoughts?
I think one thing Mike mentioned towards the end of this was sort of making sure IT and business is aligned. And I think having a BIA does help with that alignment, because now you're going full from top all the way down to the bottom. Yeah. Versus before, you don't know where you really fit or why you're doing something or what all those dependencies are, because that's sometimes the hardest part in an organization as it grows and scales. And so I think starting with the BIA at least gets everyone sort of thinking from the same perspective, and then you work out the details.
Yeah, it does allow you to, when you're, because if you're sometimes those of us that are techies, we want to do, Mike, earlier you talked about, you buy new stuff because it's cool. Sometimes that's why we want to do stuff, right? Why me? Look, but I'm just saying there are times when you're not wanting to buy something or change something because it's cool. You're wanting to buy something or make a significant change in your system design because you don't think it's adequately meeting the needs of the business, and having access to the BIA and say, listen, we've looked at the BIA and we found out that this department loses $1 million every 5 minutes and we're down. We currently, if we have a cybersecurity outage or a fire or a terrorist attack, we're going to be down for 2 weeks. 2 weeks times 5 minutes or divided by 5 minutes is a lot of millions of dollars. So you can use that as a way to support the things that you've been wanting to do with your system.
That is correct.
Yeah. And with that, I will say thank you to our guests, Mike, thank you very much for coming on again.
Anytime. Thank you, guys.
And thanks, Prasanna.
You do not get your 2 hours back, Curtis.
I digress. All right. And thank you, of course, to our listeners. We'd be nothing without you. And dang it. Oh, that is a wrap. The Backup Wrap-Up is written, recorded, and produced by me, W. Curtis Preston. If you need backup or DR consulting, content generation, or expert witness work, check out backupcentral.com. You can also find links for my O'Reilly books on the same website. Remember, this is an independent podcast, and any opinions that you hear are those of the speaker and not necessarily an employer. Thanks for listening.